Nigger. You'll notice, despite my saying that word, hard R and all, the world is fine. The sun is still in the sky, unless you're watching this at night, in which case it'll return shortly, I promise. Water is still a liquid, fire is still hot, birds are still dicks. The general order of nature and the universe is preserved and continues. And yet, the left and certain segments of the black community would have you believe that the average black IQ score dropped another point, and I forced another 100 young black men to go out and shoot a different 100 young black men, while stealing money from their bank accounts and food from their bellies. This is the lie that some people are now tired of. Arguments can be made for context, of course. I am merely saying the word without malice to make a philosophical point, and more importantly, so people actually know what the N-word is, because it isn't just any word beginning with the letter N, of which there are many. Now, this word can be said in the UK, at least in this context. We cannot say it with malice or hatred or intent to cause violence or harm, although that is being rapidly expanded to the state where any utterance is a cause of violence or harm, but we'll cover that shortly. In the US, you should be able to say that word in any context, including with malice, but most people don't because they aren't malicious people. This is what the First Amendment hypothetically allows, although this is also increasingly under attack with the desire for more UK-style hate speech laws, where a third party will insert into your mind an intention that they have no way of knowing if it was there or not. With that in mind, let's now set the scene. I'm sure you're all familiar with the Shiloh Hendrix story, so I don't particularly feel the need to cover it in its entirety, but I would like to consider it a little more broadly. So in this case, Hendrix herself, a tattooed, reportedly single mother, although I do question the veracity of these claims, but given trends in recent years I wouldn't be surprised, and alleged OnlyFans creator. I have no desire to attempt to find images to confirm or deny this, it may simply be hearsay, rumour, or slander. I've also seen allegations of a record of driving under the influence and disorderly conduct charges in her past. I bring these points up not because they matter in any way at all to the points I want to make. Indeed, mentioning them is basically pointless. That's how irrelevant they are. It's just interesting to note and will no doubt serve as a little bait, which will actually help prove my later points that I do want to make if it is taken. I will, however, say if any of these are true, the right needs to get better heroes. There are definitely better people to rally behind and totemize in this culture war. The gynocentric simping for someone who is, as the kids would say, mid at best, is not surprising but is a letdown, and don't even try to pretend that is not what is happening. Had this woman been a man with his child at the park, you'd now be reading about how Seamus Hendrix and possibly his child were beaten or killed for saying the dreaded N-word to a black person, and BLM would justify it. For the record, there is no video of Hendrix saying the word to the child, only her saying it to an adult black man who belligerently dared her to say it. An adult black man who, by the way, seems to hold a criminal record involving children, and who is hanging around in a children's play area, a fact that seems to be very selectively ignored by the mainstream media and other apologists who don't want to ask awkward questions. Nor do they ask about the 5-year-old alleged victim of these mean, hurty words, the one who was doing the alleged act of thievery that kickstarted this whole affair, who is supposedly autistic, by the way, and where that child's parents were during this event, and currently are. It seems no one can provide anything of or from them, but those are yet more awkward questions we're not supposed to ask. The whole thing, the entire situation, top to bottom, is just weird, and I'm increasingly questioning if anyone involved is genuine, or if this is some elaborate ruse to manufacture consent for something, a grift for money or fame, or some sort of bizarre social program from one of many various large international companies, governments, NGOs, or quangos, nudge units, and or other such programs. But asking those sorts of questions is racist or a conspiracy theory or something, so I'll leave that there. I couldn't help but notice the trad cuck natalist arguments slipping in here and there about a white woman holding a white child and the imagery thereof. Never mind, once again, the potential single mother angle. To those trad cuck natalists so concerned with birth rates as to demonize those without children, because taking 18 years to raise a child will definitely counter 18 years of mass immigration demographic change, I revoke your right to ever complain about single mother welfare-dependent man deserts ever again. They did their duty and spawned, after all, so any amount of welfare is justified. They can live on it forever, never work a day in their lives. Forget those childless people who disproportionately pay into the tax system. They're the real enemy, don't you know? A point that is even more amusing given how many of those tradcucks are themselves Christians. I'm sure they're celibate by requirement for job title priests, are also the evil people selfishly destroying society. But I digress. So, why the pushback? Why has this become the rallying cry? Well, as said, a woman, especially a woman with child in tow under threat, is, and always has been, the rallying cry of every society. If you notice the increased pushback against large-scale immigration in the West, what is the most recent complaint, and the one that is gathering the issue the most attention and support? It's women. White women saying they are scared and under threat. Never mind men have been saying this will happen and is the inevitable outcome of this pattern of immigration for anything from 20 to 40 years now. In the UK, you need only look at the history of, for example, the British National Party to see how long this position has existed for in a fairly mainstream visible fashion. Although, they were not the first. No, when men say it, they're just dumb, ignorant racists. But now that women are crying, it's a problem. The human condition will always be a source of disappointment in how easily it can be manipulated. See, for example, the recent creation of the Women's Safety Initiative group in the UK, inspired by Collectif Nemesis in France and Switzerland. These two are more explicit in being specifically right-leaning politically. However, there was also a government initiative aimed at the same thing, the Safety of Women at Night Fund in the UK, for example. Funding aimed at giving police tools and knowledge to increase women's feeling of safety at night. Not mentioning specifically why women have been feeling this way in recent years, because that goes against the government's preferred opinions on the topic. But an attempt was made. Over the last several decades, an unstoppable and undeniable white guilt complex has been built while observing blacks raising their racial consciousness and burning down cities at the slightest provocation, especially in the US. Never forget the Summer of Love and fiery but mostly peaceful protests. There is a hard line of anti-white hatred in the non-white communities in Western nations, especially in the black community in the US. Part of the reason the Austin Metcalf story got so big, we'll talk more about that shortly, was the racial angle and the post-event funding. Again, we'll touch on that later. There were donations made to the Black Killer, for legal reasons I must append the word allegedly here, that basically amounted to, "Congratulations, you killed a white person." There is a streak of very high resentment towards whites in blacks in the US. It cannot be bypassed by hoping that it will go away, and frankly I don't think it can be addressed because the resentment is too deeply ingrained. Certain blacks will blame whites for anything and everything wrong in their own lives, no matter how within their control it is. This, I think, stems from decades of broken black families aided, funded, and therefore basically encouraged by the state, being fed relentless propaganda of blame. Nothing you do is your fault, it's all the man, specifically the white man. The works of Frantz Fanon, specifically Wretched of the Earth, should be consulted to know what the end goal of this narrative is. You can hear more on that in my video, The Vanishing of the Anglo-Saxon. The most recent event, the Austin Metcalf killing, in which a black person, Carmelo Anthony, stabbed and killed a white person, Austin Metcalf, is being compared to hurty mean words. Interestingly, about the Metcalf case, the Wikipedia entry does not contain the name of the accused, despite it being in several news reports, secondary sources, which are Wikipedia's preferred sources, almost like they have a bias. Yes, there has been an extensive editing war on this topic, noting that the likes of Derek Chauvin and Kyle Rittenhouse had their names made public as soon as the event happened, Rittenhouse being especially notable as he, like Anthony, is a minor at the time of the accusation. That didn't stop the Wikipedia editors from slamming Rittenhouse's name everywhere they could, but Anthony, well, he belongs to a different class of people. As far as can be seen, the Metcalf incident didn't have anything to do with race, but has been framed in such a way because whenever a black person is accused of anything, particularly when a white person is involved, usually as their victim, there is a massive lobbying effort and huge amounts of money thrown at them to assist, even in times of a relative open and shut case. It is impossible to not notice the large amounts of funding being funneled directly into Anthony's family after this event, despite Anthony himself being the accused murderer. This case is being directly compared to the Shiloh Hendrix case, in which no one died. By all accounts, the Hendrix case should not have been as big as it is now. However, it happened at a perfect moment where the racialized killing of the Metcalf incident was still fresh in people's minds, after years of the BLM riots and cities burning. Also, the Hendrix case can be highlighted because of its rarity, but that will be discussed shortly. The left and black activists more broadly have lost the plot and the moral high ground, which I would argue they never held, but that is by the by. So how and why does this happen? The oft-cited bigotry of low expectations, a hilariously ironic position that the left engages in, whereby non-white people's actions will be excused because of their race. Now, they rely on some convoluted historical oppression narrative, which is in many cases outright wrong, and in other cases relies on the existence of the institution of slavery. Unfortunately, the slavery argument holds no water. It is centuries old, was stopped by white people, specifically English people at their own expense around the world, enforced by the Royal Navy. The US banned it, notably 7 years after the Civil War, which was supposed to be all about ending slavery. 7 years is a little indulgent to end something that is the sole reason the war was fought, but okay. I definitely believe that narrative and can see no other reasons why an area of land would want to secede from a centralized government hundreds of miles away. The cry for reparations, and only once that has been paid will this difference in IQ and crime rates close and vanish. This, of course, ignores that these reparations have already been paid in the forms of billions in disproportionate welfare spending. Combine this with the notably conspicuous DEI and ESG initiatives and multi-tiered policing. Non-whites in Western nations occupy a position of extreme privilege, to the point in the UK where the minority, mostly brown religion of Islam is pushing for effective blasphemy laws to protect itself. And there's the objective fact of two-tier or even multi-tier policing that has been made public in the last few months, although we know it's been happening for a number of years now, non-whites receiving lesser sentences for the same crimes that whites do, if any at all. The problem with this is that it creates a tiered morality system, in which white people occupy the top rung, being most accountable for their actions. This has baked into it a rather amusingly hypocritical race essentialist bio-truth that would make even the likes of Chamberlain, Reimer, Waltman and their contemporaries blush, especially even earlier writers, such as Clem with his active and passive races, and Dechtal's masculine and feminine race divisions. Take, for example, Cordet de Lisle, and the concept of the naturally preponderant races versus naturally weak races, what would later be developed into conquering races and born-to-serve races, adult races and infantile races. If you were to behold a leftist or a black proclaiming that non-whites cannot be held to the same standards as white people for committing the same actions and citing their long-since debunked pseudosciences of social construction, you begin to see the parallels. Consider the three principal components of the myth of race: the philosophical, anthropological, and philological. The philosophical is the romantic conception, the spirit or soul of a people. The anthropological is the physical distinction, and the philological is the shared point of origins, such as, for example, Proto-Indo-Europeans. Set your focus on the first of these classical divisions, the spirit, the soul, the Geist of a people, as we've covered extensively in my videos and streams covering Hegel, to the point I think recovering that ground here would be redundant. We are told, here is a group of people so frail, so fragile, so pathetic, the mere utterance of a word destroys utterly and completely their ability to form functioning societies. Contrasted to a group who you can openly slander in the most racist of ways in every piece of media in that society, negative portrayals everywhere, weak portrayals everywhere. Hell, the most high profile recently being the Adolescence show controversy. Interesting that the only time Netflix swap a black character to white is when it's a story about an underaged killer, which is now being used to manufacture consent for government overreach, surprising no one since it was also government funded. But that aside, let's return to the topic. Of these two groups, does not one of them sound superior and the other inferior? Does not one of them possess a noble, enduring spirit, while the other possesses a weak and withering spirit? Is not one of them handling the slings and arrows of relentless propaganda with mere indifference, at worst mild annoyance, while the other cannot handle a singular utterance of a singular word? Is not one of these groups handling the world as an adult would, and the other as a child? This is why I will reference these 19th and 20th century scholars of race to compare them to modern social justice, intersectionalist, woke, communist, Marxist, whatever word you'd like to use to describe them. They bear striking similarity. You can see right there the Hegelian tradition, albeit the left Hegelians in the case of modern communists. The relative patheticness of one of these positions is further exemplified when you consider the following. Western white nations are the most racist in the world, according to leftist orthodoxy. Non-whites are discriminated against in every manner, in every corner of existence at all times. Racist discrimination, microaggressions of, you're one of the good ones, and being asked, well, where are you really from? Up to and including being executed in the streets by police and vigilantes, with every excuse made to belittle and ignore this rampant genocide. We're to believe that this society exists and that we live in it, while a woman is being paraded around and publicly pilloried for unapologetically saying the dreaded N-word on film. You cannot have both of these things be true. If the leftist narrative is correct, these black people being called by that term would be nothing of note. There would be no outrage. And yet there is. Mass media condemnation, full government condemnation, many private companies condemning as well, if relevant. Basically, every institution has rallied against this white person in favor of the black party. This flies in the face of the narrative we are told so hard, to the point it not only strains, but outright shatters credulity. The grassroots support for this woman does not exist in a vacuum, and cannot be used to justify the narrative either. It should also be noted part of Hendrix's fundraising campaign cites her and her children's now lack of safety as a result of this viral event in which she said a mean word. Once again, this would not happen in a racist white supremacist society that just hates black people, up to and including to the point of execution in the streets. She would be protected by default by everyone and the state, and have no fears at all of reprisal. Yet this is not the case. It gives further evidence to the lie. This event happens at the end of decades of social abuse and degradation aimed at white people by the large-scale institutions mentioned. Some small segment of white people have had enough. This relentless double standard and leftist desire for non-whites to raise their racial consciousness has caused whites to begin to recognize their own in-group preference. Certain segments of the right wing is, anyway. Leftists continue to have their out-group bias, even to the point where self-professed liberals, classical or otherwise, who have spent the last 10 years publicly arguing against the likes of the alt-right and or ethno-nationalists, now begin to touch upon supporting their arguments, with no admission of this change, I notice. Somewhat sad, but I suppose the support is enough. I know I'm not the only one in noticing this. Indeed, I recently listened to a show, podcast, talk, presentation, I'm not sure what term is best to describe it, by Millennial Woes, who noted the same thing. Seeing people he's previously argued against now flirting with stating his own position, albeit in less clear or concise terms, or perhaps merely avoiding the bits that might impact their ability to be monetized or present on mainline tech sites. I do find myself wondering if this newfound awareness of ethnic solidarity might be the beginning of a Gobineauian spiritual recognition, or merely a continuation of the materially recognized differences between populations. Perhaps the latter could indeed evolve into the former, people realizing or rediscovering the so-called myth of race. Not myth in the fantastical sense, but myth in the sense of there is a founding legend that gives a solid continuity to this concept, not merely the material. The notion that there is an ethnic soul, a Geist of the folk, as we find in Hegel and the right Hegelians that would follow. The philia found and developed by Socrates, Plato, etc. found in the Roman tradition. The underlying in-group of ethnos. The capital B of black, capital T of trans, now being joined by the capital W of white. However, I doubt this will happen. The internet has a strange way of giving false perception as to the importance of certain events, and I think this is one of them. Viral? Yes. However, that which burns brightest is often the first to fade. Will this be totally forgotten within a week? A month? Perhaps. I'm aware that historically speaking I've often been labelled the naysayer of these sorts of events, a title that is not warranted in any way. The passage of time shows that to be true. Many of my statements on these sorts of issues often turn out to be correct, especially when it comes to the supposed importance of internet people and how quickly they are forgotten or destroyed once they step outside their own echo chambers of yes men. But I can't help but think that not much will come of this. We already know there is a segment of the populace that is sick of the white guilt narrative. They have been sick of it for the past decades. Is it growing? Slowly, perhaps. But to outright state white guilt is over, as I see many doing of this event, is just an outright lie. One viral flash-in-the-pan event bolstered by a small cadre of particularly clued-in people and a smaller group of terminally online talking heads does not show a mass awakening of the white man, or the Anglo finally beginning to hate, or whatever other pseudo-intellectual reference can be made to make this appear more relevant than it actually is. I put this in the same category as the people stating, woke is being put away, we're totally winning, and yet their YouTube channels are filled, day in and day out, gotta chase that algorithm treadmill after all, with anti-woke outrage, because there's still more than enough far-left communist, Marxist, etc. nonsense infecting every facet of society. Sure, you can make the case for celebrating small victories here and there, but to outright declare, this is done now. It reminds me so much of people who keep telling me, and others like me, you're so 2016 in what we talk about. These topics didn't end in 2016 with the American election of Trump. What actually happened is you stopped paying attention in 2016 because of that election, and in doing so, you let other forces win. This is why things are so much worse now. We're still talking about these topics over 10 years later because the topics are still relevant. Even more so now than it was back then, which is why more people are talking about it now than back then. Do not make the same mistake again. Were I a more cynical person, and I am, I would suggest that the people making this white guilt is over, woke is done, woke is being put away sort of position are a form of controlled opposition, specifically to make people stop paying attention. And if they're not, then they're certainly doing their best impression of one. Perhaps a better term might be allowed opposition. They are not directly controlled, but because they are the worst and weakest representation of a group or political position or philosophy, they are simply the ones allowed to gain traction and attention, while the best and brightest and often forerunners of that movement's ideas are throttled and shadow banned into oblivion, or outright removed from every platform in existence, relegated to their own private websites, or the relative limbo nowhere of alt-tech, where their reach is inherently limited. I'll believe this woke is being put away when DEI initiatives aren't in the middle of being rebranded into Bridge so it can continue unabated, when ESG initiatives are no longer being directly funded by my tax money laundered through the government, active mass deportations of people who have entered the country illegally. This is the absolute minimum for me to even consider beginning to contemplate the notion that wokeness may be going away at some point in the future. This woke is being put away narrative is even more egregious when I see it coming from commentators from the UK, a country that is actively under communist rule. But being terminally online and, more importantly, receiving most of your money and attention from an American audience suddenly seems to cause a blind spot and over-enthusiasm for what is happening across the pond at the expense of what is happening in their own back garden. But hey, big strong Daddy Trump won in a far-off land, so our own communist infestation in the highest halls of power, actively persecuting people with years-long jail sentences for saying things that are true online and pushing their far-left agenda, doesn't matter. Go back to sleep. Do not look at small victories, especially small victories in other countries, and then tuck yourself back in to drift off into your dreamland fantasy where far-left lunacy is no longer a problem because they're, once again, rebranding it to hide it from you. The problem of race baiting is still here and still needs to be destroyed. White guilt is not over. This is merely the potential first volley in what could become a larger push. Just don't let the fatigue that so many are feeling as a result of noticing things develop into actual fatigue. But I still doubt this will happen. Once again, I feel compelled to point to the imagery of the situation, the memeability of it. Indeed, the memes painting this Hendrix woman as Joan of Arc, the savior saint of the white race with her white babies. If only Seamus Hendrix would be so viewed were he in the same situation. But men out there, you're welcome to prove me wrong. Film yourself as a lone white man calling a small number of black people "you inwa," and see how quickly you become fabulously wealthy and celebrated for being a hero of the white race. I'll be sure to visit you in hospital and bring you a get well soon card with a massive "I told you so" written inside. And that's about the extent of the social sympathy you will receive as a man doing the same thing. Unless, of course, you do something particularly meme-worthy, like wearing a Burger King crown when you do it. In which case, people still won't care about you, the person, or give you money, but you may become a funny meme picture for a little while. Lest we forget, the top of the hierarchy for moral consideration is, and always has been, women. That one fact is why this Hendrix case has got the traction that it has. She is a woman. If every time a woman did something immature and stupid in a moment of emotional outburst, as Hendrix did, that resulted in doxing and death threats, every household in the world would be doxed and receiving death threats. You are not fighting the woke by siphoning money, mostly from white men, into the pockets of a white woman. The race issue, while of interest in this case, is not the main thing that has blown this up. It is the woman issue. Once again relating this to the recent Metcalf story that it is being falsely compared to, Metcalf, a white man, had to die in order to receive even a shred of the support that this still living woman is receiving. It is in fact his killer who is now $500,000 better off. Hendrix will most likely end up as a millionaire as a result of this, if not purely from her charity page, which is looking more and more likely by the day, then from paid-for interviews and appearances in the coming weeks. A white man would be granted no such excess. As previously stated, he would end up beaten and or dead at the site, or just put in jail later, where he would also more than likely end up dead. Such is the privilege of being female. Yes, we must not discount the race angle to the story. After all, it is a culmination of decades of events. But to ignore the woman question in this story is the downfall of almost everyone I see talking about this, especially the few right-leaning people who want to ignore it entirely in favor of the race angle, because they still cannot bring themselves, for all their self-proclaimed red pillness, to answer the issue of women, their choices and actions, but will instead merely hang their browbeaten henpecked heads and whimper a meek, "Yes, dear," when their women get outraged. There is a certain amusement in the fact that this fight basically comes down to non-white men versus white woman, who is thus white women by proxy because sisterhood rhetoric, fighting over who is higher in the moral hierarchy. They can't both be right after all, and thus we see the conflict. Even further amusingly is the fight of white men against white men to keep themselves off the very bottom of this hierarchy by being the one good man because he either defended women or defended minorities. It doesn't matter, you lose no matter what if you keep playing by those rules. The way you actually win is to sit back and say, let the white women and their simps, and the non-white men and their simps, fight it out amongst themselves, while I sit here and eat this popcorn and drink this beer.